Hello and welcome to our strategy outlook on 5G Edge, part of our Spotlight on 5G series. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV. The rapidly evolving communications and cloud network architectures are migrating away from centralized data centers and closer to end users, creating new service opportunities at the edge. Telcos have the benefit of existing extensive edge locations utilizing their legacy infrastructure assets. However, they're lacking the proven cloud-based service provision of the global public cloud hyperscalers. We're going to investigate if the combination of 5G and Edge will unlock significant new revenue growth for telcos and whether they can go it alone or need to partner with the public cloud companies. Coming up later in the program, we have a roundtable discussion featuring executives from Verizon, Telenor, Colt, HPE and Intel. Plus, we talk to a number of telecoms leaders to get their views on 5G Edge. But first, we have an exclusive interview with Andrea Dona, Chief Network Officer at Vodafone UK. My colleague Ray Lemaitre spoke with Andrea earlier and asked him what 5G Edge means to Vodafone UK in terms of MEC assets and whether those assets were Vodafone's or those of its partners.
Thanks, Ray. The assets are a mix of both Vodafone assets and partner assets. And the assets really depend on what service you want to deliver, where you want to deliver, and how you want to deliver it. So if you've got the example of AWS Wavelength, which we launched last week, you want to put that computational power as close as possible to your strategic nodes in Vodafone, where you can have easy access to the network functions that the network provides you with. If, however, you want to provide services that are a lot closer to the customer, you can use the case of MPN, a mobile private network, where the asset is a customer asset that is close to the customer, and you provide the network functions to those assets close to the customer premise.
And what kind of services can Vodafone realistically deliver and make money from using these assets?
As we deliver an edge-based architecture, an edge-based network architecture, all the services like low latency, ultra low latency, the high speed that 5G brings all become feasible. But I very provocatively almost want us to free ourselves from what we can sell, but prepare ourselves for every eventuality. By exposing network functions, by creating a standardized interface to the network function and making all the network functions available at the edge, you're prepared for any eventuality. So you're prepared for any services that the customers might avail from the network functions that you're exposing. So I'm not one for chasing the killer application. I'm one for preparing the network for every eventuality and focusing on standardizing the network, rationalizing the network, clearly optimizing the network from a coverage perspective to ensure that the services you do expose, that you can interface into with standard APIs, are available. And then once they're available, we let the ecosystem of our partners, the developers, then really come and try those services. And from that, I'm sure we'll get great revenue streams and great applications rather than trying to second guess them. There will be, as I said earlier, probably latency-based services, location-based services, and capacity and speed type services that you want to expose on an edge-based platform.
Okay, interesting. That's a very sort of cloud-oriented approach to this. Now, you mentioned there earlier that there's different ways to approach edge services. You've got these more centralized nodes, and then you've got the edge assets that are closer to the customer. Ultimately, how granular might the edge infrastructure become? Could it evolve to include IT infrastructure even at street level? Will that ever be necessary?
I think we'll tend to there eventually, for sure. We will start with our edge-based network functions being available in the sort of tens of assets, moving towards the hundreds of assets. Eventually, we'll get to 1,000 and beyond. For sure, that's an evolutionary path that we will definitely embark in. And that will also depend on the sort of latency requirements that you'd want. When you get to lower than the 10 milliseconds and you go lower than the 5 milliseconds, that granularity will definitely be required eventually. But we will start with the tens of assets having mobile edge computing and gradually moving to the hundreds and the thousands. And along that route, I believe that we will eventually get to that granular level that you talk about, but it will take time.
Okay, right. So at the beginning of the journey in many ways then. Now, in terms of the technology that you're deploying and using, are there any particular IT infrastructure capabilities that you need to support your 5G edge ambitions? I mean, for example, do telcos need a new breed of servers?
As we virtualize and as we containerize the network functions, the IT server element of that virtualization obviously has to evolve and develop. And as more complex functions are virtualized, that IT capability, so to speak, needs to evolve with time. But I'd like to draw your attention, Ray, on the need to create an environment, a physical environmental control system in the data centers to control these additional servers, this additional computational power in terms of environmental controls, in terms of temperature controls, in terms of power consumption. So even though the IT needs to develop for those containerized network functions, there's a whole piece of the environmentals around it that need to develop as well. And that's something that we should not underestimate.
Okay, yes, no, that's becoming a really important topic for all operators. Now, ultimately, will edge computing platforms support all services and functions, including radio access network?
I think so. I think it will evolve there as well. We started seeing the start of a disaggregation of the functions with the control user plane separations as a standard of the mobile core. We see those sort of concepts developing also in the fixed core. And we see in Cloud RAN and Open RAN where you've got a division between your baseband in the control units of the distributed unit and a mixture of the two. So invariably, you'll get a progression towards that disaggregation of functions, including the RAN, albeit maybe partly central and partly distributed as the computational power, as the chipsets evolve to be able to take control of that burdensome baseband processing requirements that the RAN requires.
That was Andrea Dona speaking earlier with my colleague Ray Lemaitre. An interesting glimpse of the future as well as disaggregation continues to gather pace. And we've been speaking to a number of other operators and vendors for our Spotlight on 5G series, and we're going to hear from some of those now. I spoke with Jeff Edland, CTO of the Communications Technology Group at HPE, and asked him about the new opportunities that are emerging around 5G and Edge, and where he sees the most interesting areas of innovation in the telecoms ecosystem.
The edge is providing opportunities that we haven't even seen before. And, one of the first places that I've really seen start to take off, and that's in private communications. So you've got enterprises all around the world that are wanting to leverage the ability to use the edge to provide a communication service for their enterprise that leverages some of the unique features of 5G and will allow them to get some very particular advantages. And those edge use cases beyond private communications that we see starting to come on is the collection of data, the analysis of that data on the edge, and then the ability to make decisions based upon what you see in the data on the edge, and to be able to automate many operations at the edge rather than having to haul data back into over the network to a data center, crunch it in the data center, and then send some sort of demand response back. The edge is allowing this opportunity for real-time collection of data and real-time actions as a result of having access to that data. And then the final thing that I would say is that this is stimulating a whole set of new innovation for real-time use cases, and I anticipate that we'll see these real-time use cases start to deliver applications and services that we've never seen before, simply because we have the capability to deliver it from the edge. And I think you're going to see really interesting augmented reality and virtual reality applications happening out there at the edge. And I think many of them could be surprises and rather unanticipated from us.
It's a view echoed by Darrell Jordan-Smith, SVP Industry and Global Accounts at Red Hat.
We're seeing a lot of innovation at the edge of the network, not only with the service providers who are looking at different radio access technologies to drive the next generation network infrastructure, but also how those infrastructures are going to apply in different industry segments, because a lot of the service providers need to monetize those investments by delivering the next generation of applications that actually leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning and augmented reality.
But with so many applications and so many opportunities for edge-based services, I asked Darrell if the role of partners and the ecosystem has changed.
Partners are having to work with different cloud providers. So companies like Amazon or Azure, for example, they really want to develop and test and certify their cloud native based application on a common platform that can run in those environments as well as on premise. So as we've spoken to many times before, Red Hat's, core value proposition is that we create the best common platform, the best horizontal platform to be able to do that can scale at large data centers all the way through to a single node at the far edge using the same technology. And what that means for a partner is they build their application once and they can deploy it in many different scenarios, which actually then reduces the cost and the number of different platforms and variants they have to support in the marketplace, which then furthers their time to market and their ability to support cloud native applications in the cloud in a manner that is more traditionally orientated around telecommunications, around carrier grade availability.
There are so many interesting use cases and business models being developed for Edge, perhaps more so than 5G alone. As part of our Spotlight on 5G Week, I spoke with Ronan Dunne, EVP and Group CEO of the Verizon Consumer Group, and he explained how 5G and Edge could enhance the level of customer experience and broaden the range of connected devices.
So our economy has changed significantly, and the nature of the services and experiences customers get has been transformed. So the industry, not just in its own customer service and experience, but has been an incredible enabler of a significantly enhanced level of experience for consumers generally. I think in the 5G era, the opportunity we have is to go even further. I talked about the idea of mobile edge computing. That is going to allow us to deliver different types of devices and experiences. Think about AR and mixed reality that can be made accessible and affordable at scale. Think about industrial IoT, which in the past, there's been lots of good ideas, but hasn't always been scalable because of cost. Well, 5G will usher in an era where 10 times as many connected devices per square mile or square meter, and with battery life enhanced by maybe 10x, all of a sudden those devices have a much longer useful life. And as a result, the economics of many of the use cases, not just driverless cars, but lots of other things, will be significantly enhanced.
And Ronan was speaking to us about the incredibly important issue of accessibility and Verizon's work with the valuable 500. I recommend you watch the full interview later. But whilst there is tremendous excitement from the telcos about the possibilities that Edge and 5G could deliver, are enterprise customers equally enthralled? We hear a lot of positive feedback from the manufacturing and industrial sectors, but what about other enterprises and organisations? I spoke to Simon Haston, CTIO for Regions and Devolved Government with BT, and first asked him what the relationship is between Edge and 5G and how he sees them fit together.
I think they both have the same aim, and that is to bring greater bandwidth, greater data usage, but also greater latency. And I think that the relationship between the two has become quite symbiotic, in the sense that we don't have 5G everywhere. 5G is very early doors. It's going to take a while for that to have full coverage. Not all devices are 5G ready. So I think Edge provides that really good bridge between a 5G application and how we can scale that up. And particularly with customers who are quite strategic and want to run a lot of different applications, develop new innovation, develop new stuff across wide estates. That's where Edge and 5G really comes in. And they begin to really almost act together to help 5G on its way, as it were.
I then asked what he was hearing from his enterprise customers about Edge-enabled services and whether this is something they're already talking about and specifying.
I think some customers don't look at it at all, don't see it as part of that architecture. I think as we begin to work with them on 5G use cases and 5G applications, they begin to look at their wider estate, they begin to look at their cloud strategy, and they begin to look at the mixture of converged connectivity, hybrids, pure clouds, and actually they begin to see that really if they want to get the real performance and almost that journey that they're on, they're going to need different edge capabilities. And so actually, as more as we get into the use cases, we get into the nuts and bolts of actually running new applications that could be very immersive. They could need near real-time data and collaboration. That actually our customers begin to look at it architecturally and actually begin to look at it saying, well, Edge needs to be part of our architecture going forward. And that's where we work very closely with them. So I'd say there's not a huge amount of demand coming out of our enterprise customers, but that is undoubtedly going to ramp up over the next year, as we bring in new innovation, as we create, new opportunities, and as we really test some of their IT architectures and their ability to run new, really advanced applications over their existing, legacy network.
It's becoming very clear that there's a strong link between 5G and Edge from a strategic perspective for many operators and vendors. Well, we spoke earlier with Renu Navale, Vice President of the Data Platforms Group and General Manager of the Edge Computing and Ecosystem Enabling Division at Intel, and asked her to tell us a little bit more about Intel's approach to 5G and the Edge.
So as a key consideration for the ability to deploy edge platforms, especially for our enterprise customers, they want the complexity around 5G to be made highly simple. That's one. And then the second is they want to be able to customize their edge platforms to suit their own business needs. Now, to address this, Intel offers an edge-ready product portfolio that includes both hardware as well as software. There's a number of feature-rich silicon products that we've built specifically for the edge, like our next-generation Xeon D processors, and that are sampling right now. So both our Intel Xeon as well as our Xeon D processors are being deployed not only across the network, but also at the edge as operators roll out 5G.
We also asked what Intel is doing to drive service acceleration and application development at the edge.
So from an edge perspective, software is really key to extending what we started out as NFV in the network core, and we've been extending that to the edge, and more importantly, delivering cloud-native capabilities at the edge. So cloud native is going to pave the way for 5G, and it's really what forms the basis of our architectural foundation for our edge computing software. For the multi-access edge computing software layer, we have focused on not only the MEC capabilities or the 3GPP 5G and HC-MEC capabilities or features that we need to offer. We've also focused on ensuring we are addressing the complexity that's involved with onboarding and managing various edge applications, services, as well as network functions on our edge platforms.
Renu and Navale there on why software is key. Now, we discussed digital transformation and edge computing with Chris Wright, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Red Hat, and asked him why he believes that standardization is the necessary foundation that brings this all together.
Just think of scale. So all companies, not just network operators, but all companies are looking for some kind of manageability at scale. And a common platform is a great way to deliver that. If you think of how hyperscalers build their businesses, it's scaled out with common building blocks. Also, we hear a lot about the need for speed or agility. And the good news is companies don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, we're here to help service providers move faster and build these new business models without always having to build a new platform. And then if you take more of a kind of a economics or business view, that common infrastructure creates new business models and allows companies to compose tools together to create unique opportunities. So, think about maybe custom built charging models so that you can charge by resources consumed in your network and enable service providers to match the cost of building the networks to generating more revenues to really help make this transformation to something like 5G. And you think about what are the huge revenue opportunities? It's adding connections and services to enterprises on the edge.
Chris Wright there of Red Hat. And you can watch full-length versions of all these interviews. They are all available to view now on demand. You'll find details on the Spotlight on 5G section of the TelecomTV website. Okay, it's time now for our roundtable discussion on 5G Edge. So let me introduce our panelists. Rolf Eberhardt, Head of Orchestration, Communications Technology Group with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Renu Navale, who is Vice President, Data Platforms Group, General Manager, Edge Computing and Ecosystem Enabling Division at Intel. Terje Jensen, who is Senior Vice President, Head of Global Network Architecture and Director of the 5G Readiness Strategic Program, Technologies and Services at Telenor. Mark Gilmore, Mobile Connectivity Solutions at Colt Technology Services. And Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies with Verizon. Well, hello everyone, very good to see you all again. Now, we often talk about the new skills that are required by today's telcos, which leads us nicely into my first question. Do 5G service providers have sufficient knowledge and expertise of edge technologies and markets? Terje, can I start by asking this of you, because this 5G edge relationship looks logical, but what are the other skills actually there to make it work in practice?
I think it's a great question, Guy, and thanks for that. So if you're asking the question, do we have all the skills and the knowledge on the long run, to understand where this is going to end up, I will probably lean towards a negative answer. So I hardly think that there are anyone actually who understands the full market on this, both from the customer point of view, but also from the different players there. So the question then, in my mind, turns into: do we have sufficient, as you're asking, do we have enough understanding or insight to get going? And there we have concluded yes. So we are going on this. We are sitting down and figuring out and having dialogues, for example, with the customers on what they want, having the discussions with potential partners on how we can do it, and also then get going and start working on this. And the finding so far, just to come back to part of the question on the edge and 5G, is that customers, you can typically bucket or put the needs into different categories. So some of them are asking, for example, for support for connected cameras, typically like HD or high definition cameras, rather high bit rate, which is then asking for 5G. So then and local then on processing of this video as well. So in that respect, then 5G and edge fits together nicely in a way in order to support that needs. Then other customers are asking for for connecting on quite a huge number of sensors, for example, which then typically are connected today by 4G, but they still want to have in the building or in the campus processing. So that will be edge and 4G. And then there are other customers who are more occupied with, I need to have something similar to cloud capabilities. I want to modernize my IT infrastructure. I need to connect a few of my production units, for example, onto some local control units and so on, which is basically an edge opportunity for edge cloud as well, and probably more agnostic on 4G and 5G. So that's what we have come across today, that actually we have edge as a component, we have 5G as a component, we have 4G as a component, and there are quite a few different components, and we need to have knowledge and competency on all of these components. So to do that, we have engaged on this, what we call an explorative approach. Sitting down, figuring out how we can do it, learning from that, iterate, improving, and then get going. And I think it's very important also that there's a lot of maturing going on, both within the organization, but also in the market, and definitely also on the standardization and the different technologies. So you will probably never get enough, in that sense, but you probably have enough to get going. So that's our conclusion for the moment, at least.
Thank you very much, Terje. Do we have enough knowledge? Because the demand for knowledge is increasing all the time in this business. So any other viewpoints as to, do we have sufficient skills and knowledge of what it means to make the Edge a success for us, Beth?
Yeah, I would say we're still learning. It's still early in the game. I've been working on Edge probably about four, closer to 5 years now. And the market's changed, the skill sets requires changed. I still see a dichotomy between the networking skills that are needed to support the Edge and the skills, the development and the application type skills that the developer community brings. They tend not to have networking skills, and the networking community and the telecoms don't tend to have application skills. So those really need to be married together to really realize the Edge to its full extent.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Good point there about the marriage of skills. Mark?
I would just say to that, and so there's an opportunity there. The telco can either bring in those skills and bring them in-house and scale them up, or work with specialists in those areas. And I think because of the multitude of use cases that start to come out, that I think there has to be some pragmatic approach to having those skill sets. I agree that I think we've got enough to get started, and I think we've got enough to know where there is a deficiency, and then how to fill that deficiency in skills, and taking then that there's a broader church then that needs to come together to deliver on the use cases. Some of the work we've found is that there are specialist SIs that kind of have a focus in one use case or one vertical rather than the other, and that starts to draw out then the marriage of those skill sets. From like the application world versus the networking telco world.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you everyone for those comments. Well, let's move on then to another very topical area of interest. Why does partnering with public cloud providers for 5G enabled edge services make sense for telcos? And Beth, if I could ask you this one first, because surely this could be detrimental to developing longer term relationships with industry and enterprise customers.
Totally not. So as you know, Verizon has already announced a 5G edge partnership with both AWS and Microsoft Azure. So we're already going down that path. And to us, we see this as only beneficial to everybody, because the reality is that our customers are also customers of those hyperscalers as well. So and I see this as more of a marriage that's beneficial to everybody more than it is competition. I mean, we're not hyperscalers. Been there, tried it, got out of the business because it's just a totally different business than what networking is about. And so we're concentrating, on what we're good at, and provide the hyperscalers provide those those fantastic environments and those tools that that the developer community can really use to develop those edge applications. As mentioned earlier, the telecoms aren't providing tools for creating these applications. Those are really where the hyperscalers shine, and the developer community is also used to working in those environments. And for us to build a separate environment for them to work in doesn't make any sense. So I see this as the best of both worlds for developing new applications and developing and for our partnerships going forward.
Thanks, Beth. As you say, these are two very, very different industries. So that's a win-win for the relationship there. Terry, you'd like to come in and comment?
Yeah, just a short one. I think we have decided that partnering up is a must, and of course there is a lot of different kind of partners. I think Beth walked through quite a few of them, so including the hyperscalers. So we will see that our approach is actually that this is making the cake bigger. So it's actually a bigger opportunity for all of us. Then I think it's also what was mentioned earlier, that let's not be naive, of course. So you shouldn't give away all your information immediately. You need to have the right things in place in order to limit the risks, or at least mitigate or respond to the risk if that happens. But that's like in any kind of business relationship. So I think it's we have decided again we need to partner up, and then of course partnering means a lot of things. There are a lot of engagement models within that partnership. Everything from transactional things to revenue sharing to even to joint business or joint venture. So it is a lot of opportunities and modality within the partnering relationship as well. So I think it's important to have that in mind when we are discussing partnership as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Terry. As you say, it's a business relationship. This, Rolf, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, what we're seeing is that telcos, they have a very well-respected position within the community, in particular when it's national enterprises which are coming towards an edge provider, and so there you have as a telco a unique role of being able to provide the optimal solution, going from a hyperscaler type approach to anything which might be even bare metal, depending on the business case behind it. So I really agree with the other colleagues that I think telcos should grasp that role and play this kind of a unique, trusted provider within in particular country organizations.
Great, thanks, Rolf. Some positive statements there, positive messages as to how we evolve this relationship. Let's therefore move on to our next question. Renu, if I could ask you, what role do you think that application service providers and developers play in 5G edge service deployments? And do telcos have strong enough partnerships with these companies?
So no, and it's actually a continuation from the first two questions you asked, right? 5G is definitely a catalyst and an enabler for the edge. But what's required also at the edge is, this cloud native agility or the developer agility, especially for capabilities like AI and analytics, visual and media analytics. All of these are key capabilities or use cases at the edge. So in my opinion, I think developers are one of the most critical components, application developers are one of the most critical components to truly make 5G and edge successful. And this is where I think the symbiotic relationship with the cloud service providers and the rest of the ecosystem is so important, because they're also bringing in this cloud developers who are also the application developers who are able to, with ease, create, deploy, and onboard various types of applications and services, especially ones that, again, can take advantage of not only the underlying edge computing capabilities, but also the 5G infrastructure, and more importantly these days, the pervasiveness of AI and analytics, as well as, the visual and media capabilities that's critical for every type of edge use case or every type of edge capability that needs to be delivered in various verticals these days. So as an example, we are trying to use edge computing for an industrial use case, and it can be defect detection, and that requires AI capabilities. It requires visual analytics capabilities. It requires underlying industrial real-time TSN, TSC type of capabilities. All of this in addition to the low latency capabilities that 5G provides. And what we need to do is make sure that all of this becomes very easy and seamless for application developers to be able to create applications or services on this very cloud-like, agile, and almost elastic infrastructure at the edge.
Thank you, Renu. Mark, you'd like to comment on this one as well?
Yeah, just building on that, I think the application developer or that ecosystem becomes really, really important to actually why even to have edge compute and 5G and edge in place, because ultimately if the application can run without that compute being at the edge, then it kind of defeats the purpose of why you would build that edge. So it seems kind of self-explanatory, and I think that's what makes them such a critical part, because ultimately it is the use case or the end application that drives how we build and scale the distributed cloud, the distributed edge in this form. So I think they're really critical, and I think there has to be a close working relationship there, because one of the things that then becomes a concern is because we're taking that cloud from the public cloud or from the central and kind of then starting to distribute it. You've then got a different scaling that comes into it. And one of the things that kind of keeps me awake and worried about this is that actually whatever you end up putting at the edge from a telco point of view actually becomes insufficient for the application that's required for the AI analytics, for those sort of things, and that because then it becomes very costly to scale, or to get that right. So I think bringing those two together is really, really important.
Thanks, Mark. And as you say, we need the use cases that actually require edge capabilities. Beth, you'd like to comment on this one as well?
Yeah, I have two comments about that. One on applications needing the edge, and I think there's a significant gap in the tool sets. So from the telco perspective, we're always talking about application-aware networks. SD-WAN networks are application-aware. We work hard to make sure that our networks are sensitive to the applications. What I haven't seen a whole lot, and I think this is a significant gap, is that there are very few network-aware applications. So speaking about moving those applications to the edge, they need to be aware of where they are in the network as we distribute these applications out, so that they can work optimally with the network. And I think there's a real opportunity here to build not only tools but also capabilities to test those applications, to optimize them within the context of the distributed network. So I would love to see more work around that in the coming year, in the coming years as edge becomes more prevalent out in the field.
Thank you, Beth. I think you've touched a point there. Rolf, do you think we need to see more network-aware applications?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's something which we've been invested in. So you have the appropriate in MEC. You have the interfaces around and available. Now it's really up to making use of it. And maybe this is just a question of the maturity of our application environments coming into it. One element which struck me when you were asking this question was also the question around the accessibility of the code coming from the application service providers. Things like catalogs, integrating catalogs into it. It's when I speak with end customer enterprises, they're often quite interested in having as many application assets available to them at the touch of a button, or going in that direction, so that they, the app catalog type approach brought to the edge environment. That's really something which I get asked about every once in a while. So would be another thing which a telco could definitely get brownie points upon.
Thank you, Rolf. Yes, indeed, that's what they need. Terje, what's your views on this?
Yeah, just a quick one, I think. So I think it was mentioned in the very beginning that we see the strength of the cross-functional teams when we're actually sitting down and discussing solutions. And then, of course, everyone becomes aware of each other in a way, both on the personal level, but also on the system implementation level, which is very good. And we also see that quite a few of the industrial applications are actually linked with the devices. So there's a kind of, I wouldn't say one-to-one, but at least there is a tight relationship between the device, could be a sensor, could be a camera, and the application, which is then running somewhere in the cloud, hopefully at the edge, but could be also more central in some of the cases. So it's also a strong relationship there. And then it's good to be, of course, that the network is also part of that. And when we see what's coming next, for example, on slicing and those further potentially opportunities there, we definitely need to be aware of not only the application, but also the customers, and even more on the different kind of needs they have and the context, and a lot of more awareness needs to be present across both the applications and the network to make this happen. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for those comments. Unless there's any more on this particular topic, we'll move on then. Let's move on to our next question. The low latency characteristics of 5G and edge have been cited many times. Mark, do you feel that these low latency edge apps that require 5G are overhyped? Do we have evidence yet of a demand for such services?
Oh, now which way shall I go with this question? To a certain degree, yes, there has been some overhyping. But then if I look at it from another perspective, actually, no, because these applications, these use cases are coming. And they're coming in, so they're heading this way, but they're not necessarily tied to 5G. So, so how would I define this, I suppose, in terms of looking at the evidence for this? I think where some of the overhype has come is in this idea right at the very beginning that we can have one network that does it all, that we implement slicing, and then we can assign performance requirements then that do the low latency piece. And I think that has not helped the industry because that is still to come. The evidence that I've seen for these low latency applications has really been in the kind of more in the private cellular and industry sort of applications. That's where I think it's moving along. And I think that's where there isn't an overhyping. I think the business case is being made there, and the use cases are driving forward. I think we've got to be careful of tying the use case in to be exclusively 5G and edge, because I think it's actually a mixture. And I think it goes back to the earlier point about having network aware applications, because there may be a point where they may not go over 5G or cellular, they may go over some other access medium, but still be working in that edge environment. If I look at particular use cases that we're seeing developing, some areas of interest, industry is definitely one. Industry 4.0 and factory automation. There's a lot of work going on in that. We're seeing some really good stuff coming out of Germany that we're involved in. We're trying also to see if some of those economics can work in the smart office sort of environment, or the smart building, not just for sensors and for building management, but actually in a wider context. And the drivers then for edge, and not necessarily low latency, but might be data sovereignty, for example, for having that in the edge. The other one that is really interesting is cloud gaming, and how that is developing. But I still think that's a little way ahead, and I'm sure each one of us on the panel have got other use cases that we're investigating and looking at. to create not only the technical capability, but also the business use case or the business case to go with that. So a bit of a mixed bag in terms of hyped or overhyped. I think we have been guilty of that as an industry, but I also think that we're starting to deliver on that as well.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Very interesting. So important, coming, not necessarily 100% 5G requirements. Anyone else on the panel got any thoughts about the nature of these low latency apps? Oh, it's stirring up a lot of interest already. Let's start with Beth.
Okay. Well, I'm another telecom, right? So yeah, I would agree it's somewhat overhyped. But it's also obviously a strategic direction for the telecoms, and certainly for Verizon. We haven't made any bones about that. But we're seeing obviously we need hybrid, 4 and 5G, at least for a while. And where we're seeing real interest is certainly in the gaming. Another use that we've been done already is stadium events, where you have many people and they want a richer experience. That's become very an in thing. And we're also seeing it with very high performance, drones, moving vehicles, those types of applications that really need a very high degree of low latency and also a lot of performance, very high performance. You can't mess up with a drone, right? Because it might crash into a building, which you really don't want it to do. So definitely a little bit of hype, but there's still a lot of promise. So I'm looking forward to the future.
As we all are. Thank you, Beth. I think we all wanted to come in on this one. Renu, did you want to comment on the low latency?
Yeah, so to add to what my colleagues were saying, right, what we've heard from some of our IoT and industrial customers is this need for seamless and frictionless connectivity. So they want to make sure that, it's connecting across 5G, 4G, or Wi-Fi and wired. So they want to make sure that there is seamless and frictionless connectivity across all of these different access technologies. And that's really where, having this network aware applications or having, multi-access capabilities, edge computing capabilities is so critical because it does bring the promise of 5G, or, especially the low latency promise of 5G for the types of use cases that, Beth and Mark were mentioning. It brings the promise of 5G, but at the same time, it allows 5G to coexist with some of the other access technologies, wired or Wi-Fi, that some of these verticals, like especially industrial and others, may be having. One other area where which surprised us, where we started to see the need for low latency, was also healthcare, where especially through this last 18 months, the promise of faster diagnosis or diagnosis at the edge, so you don't have to transmit all the metadata to the cloud. So we're just scratching the surface for the types of use cases that can take advantage of low latency. And I think we'll see more and more demand for low latency. And I think to address the hype question, I think the hype is not that, 5G will fix it all, right? It's really that 5G has to coexist with some of these other technologies that have been around for a long time and yet deliver on its promise of low latency and higher bandwidth, network slicing, and other types of service differentiated capabilities.
Thank you, Renu. And Rolf, might we see an increase in low latency demand as and when we get our 5G networks and services up and launched?
It will come. We first need to learn how to handle the edge, and then the ideas will pop up. It's as was said before, in manufacturing, you don't want your robot to stop 1 meter after it has run over you. It would like it to stop it before it hits you. So obviously you want to have your video analytics, very real-time-ish in front of the robot, and that one controlled as well. So for sure it's going to happen. it's not going to be the prime thing, because we need to learn to walk first, and I think that's going to be the key topic for the next 1 to 2 years, and then for sure it will happen.
Thank you, Rolf. And Terry, let's hear your views on the demand at the moment for low latency use cases for 5G and edge.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's not the majority of the requests you get where low latency is there, but I think it's important that quite a few of the customers ask for stability when it comes to response times. So more stable response time is also an argument in the latency factor in a way, but it hasn't to be don't have to be like 10-20 milliseconds, but it could be a bit more. Then of course we see, as also mentioned earlier, we see specific requests from industrial areas on remote control of some moving object or moving robots. We see, for example, gaming, mixed reality, and the remote control in general. We have a quite a specific request which we are looking into right now, which is electricity grid, where actually the owner of the electricity the grid network has 0.1 second actually to detect if something is wrong with the grid itself, and they have 0.3 seconds actually to reroute the distribution of the electricity. If they don't make it in that time, they have to shut down the whole electricity distribution with a corresponding loss of business. So then we are talking about 100 milliseconds. It's maybe we can argue whether is it low latency or not, but at least this is looking into some cases there, and to make sure the argument from the customers, the enterprise customers, from as we see it, is they are real money. They are actually talking about the real need, and so they have need for lower latency and definitely also stable or stability around the response times.
Well, that sounded pretty low latency to me, and certainly very mission critical. Thank you, Terry, for that example. Now, we can't leave our discussion here without talking about private networks. Rolf, is private 5G network the ideal 5G plus edge scenario for companies, especially those larger companies?
Private 5G it's not about private 5G, first of all. It's about edge, number one. And so what you see in a private 5G scenario is it's edge, which is connectivity, compute, plus the application environment. They are easier to handle. So it's actually a nice way of getting proper 5G out of the door if you start on the private side of things. What we see with private 5G as really being important from customer perspective is the need for simplicity. They don't need elaborate, complex environments, but they're looking for an out-of-the-box solution, local deployment. Speaking again about factories, we often hear about galvanic separation. So you don't want to put network functions into the cloud. You want to have them close by. So you would definitely want to have your core really even on the edge itself, so that you can run it locally, and then you would want to have a zero-touch environment so that it's as easy as possible to manage, with as little interruptions and as low complexity as possible. Mind you, because very often private 5G networks are then run not by a professional telecoms organization, but they're actually run maybe by a systems integrator consortium in such a space.
Thank you, Rolf. Mark?
I agree. I think that private cellular is a really good proving ground, I think, for edge capability, for edge activity. I think it drives us off much quicker than, for example, trying to utilize slicing, which is on its way but isn't here yet. But the interesting thing with the private cellular approach is we've got a pilot proof of concept test bed that we've built that we're building in France, where we're looking at the placement of that edge compute and the applications, the use cases that will work in that environment. It's kind of within the real estate sort of play, and placing those at different points. So we've set up where it has customer edge, where everything is hosted on premise. We also have a step back our network edge, Again, fairly local within that environment, and then we're also stepping back to kind of the next country along, actually, from another network edge or network cloud point of view, and we're trialing the applications and the use cases in each of those examples. So we're moving the private 5G core in each of those locations to prove out what is the most efficient, what is the most effective, how does the use case work? Because it's not always latency that is driving the reason to bring all of that compute right to the edge. It could be data sovereignty. It could be data processing, for example, and then upload what's needed only back into the central cloud. So there's all sorts of different angles to that, and it's a really, really exciting trial that we're doing, because it's building out that picture to know exactly what works and what doesn't work. So I think private cellular is a very, very good example of bringing 5G and edge together, because you've got these building blocks to work with: the service-based architecture of 5G, the edge compute architecture, and then the applications and use cases that come on top of that.
Great, thank you, Mark. Anybody else like to comment on the private network 5G edge question? It's our last question of the panel. Last chance, Tyria.
Yes, thanks. Very shortly from my side, I think we are of course sitting down with customers, and there is a broad range of demands that they are coming with. And surely private networks and private solution has its role and its position in that range of demands. So I think it's fair to say that yes, there will be private networks, I think, and then of course comes back to who's going to design it, who's going to operate it, and so on, and how to make sure that it's also developing as there are new functionality coming. But there are ways to of course to do that. There are different operating models and different business models to make that happen, I think. Then of course it's interesting also when in some of the customer dialogues what we have, they are starting with I want my own network, and then they come with by the way, I also want that my guests should be accessing and using the same network, and I also want when my sensor is or object is or whatever is moving out of the campuses, it should still be connected. Then we can argue, is it really a private or is it kind of a hybrid thing between what something is working within the campus and something which needs to be supported by roaming and different arrangement. And it very quickly ends up in some kind of hybrid and semi-public configuration. So I think it's good to have all these kind of tools in your toolbox when you're sitting down and discussing solutions with all the customers in that respect.
I think that's something we need to develop in another panel in the future. So it's a good topic there. Renu, please come on in.
Just to add very briefly to what my colleagues have stated, right? One of the key aspects to make this successful will also be simplicity. Like, how can you make networking is so complex? And as we look at deploying private networks for enterprises or within their, either campuses or their factory automation environments, how do we make it so simple so they can run it themselves or they can connect with, other service providers to run it for them? The key will be to make sure that we also address the complexity and make it easier for these enterprises to consider, 5G, private 5G as an option, to deliver business value to these vertical use cases or vertical industries.
Great, thank you, Renu. Well, thank you, everybody. We have to leave our discussion here, for now at least. So thanks for sharing your views and opinions. Great discussion. And that brings our strategy outlook on 5G Edge to a close. But my colleague Ray Lemaitre will be back tomorrow with an in-depth look at 5G Cloud. And a reminder that you can view an extensive series of programs as part of our Spotlight on 5G week, from interviews and roundtables to live Q&As and special features. We'll be showcasing new content throughout the day, Monday through to Thursday. And today you can watch the next 2 episodes of our Top 10 Moments in Mobile, where we take a look back at our best video content from 20 years of covering 3GSM and MWC. And tune in at noon UK time for The Slice, our daily news and analysis program. Then Ray and I will be back at 5 PM UK time for the live after show, along with plenty of guests and 1 or 2 surprises. We'll also be answering your questions live on air, so please send them in now, and we'll see you later. Goodbye for now.